Happy Tuesday and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Rocketeer Minute, where each and every day, Monday through Friday, we go over 1 minute of the greatest adventure movie Walt Disney's ever made, the 1991 Joe Johnston-directed feature, The Rocketeer. I'm one of your hosts, Jim O'Kane of TVDads.com.
And I'm Hal Bryan, an airplane nerd from the Experimental Aircraft Association here in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. So, Jim, we've got we can't overstate our good fortune with the fascinating guests that we keep getting lucky enough to join us. This episode, we're joined by Karey Kirkpatrick, who, if you look him up on IMDb, even though we know we don't always trust IMDb, you will see some screenplay credits from a number of movies that you've heard of. Things like The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy adaptation, James and the Giant Peach, Over the Hedge. So, Karey Kirkpatrick, thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
And Karey, you have, as we delve in here to minute 37, I really want to talk a little bit about, well, as much as you want to, about your career, but maybe you can step us through a story that we found online called "I Was Almost the Rocketeer."
Yeah, I believe. Well, that was an interesting time in my life. I was fresh out of USC Film School. Just a little brief history. I was at film school and have always loved musicals and musical theater, and I was looking for a way to write musicals and actually get paid, avoid the suffering and poorness part. My then writing partner and I were on our way back from San Diego, where we had seen Sondheim's out-of-town tryout of Into the Woods, and said, how can we write an animated musical and get paid? And we said Disney Animation, was the best place to write it. And so we wrote a spec script called Once Upon a Bayou that was a musical. And it was a really dumb spec script to write because there was only one buyer at the time. This was around 1987,
okay.
88. And so we pitched it to Disney. They didn't buy the movie, but it was rare that there was a screenwriter-songwriting duo, which worked well for them. So they hired us as summer interns. And we wrote Mickey Mouse featurettes, and then that's where I worked on my first movie that I ever did, which was The Rescuers Down Under, and first time I ever met Jeffrey Katzenberg on that movie. And they put us on another movie that was called Tiny the Alligator, which was a full-on musical which had 7 songs. And so we had written the story and the songs, and we had one of those infamous, Jeffrey was infamous for these 7 a.m. meetings, that you had to always be at his schedule. So at about 7 a.m., we're in his office, or an office on the Walt Disney lot, and pitching and singing. So, and part of this, my partner Byron at the time was at the piano, and I'm telling the story and singing songs in a very animated fashion. And at the end of it, Jeffrey says, good, yeah, keep going on the movie. Karey, let me ask you something. Have you done any acting? And I said, yeah, I started as an actor. I did plays and stuff all through high school. I was pursuing acting, up until a couple of years ago. And he said, we're doing this movie called The Rocketeer, and we're having a really hard time finding the lead. And I'd like you to screen test for it.
Wow.
So this was my Schwab's drugstore moment. And I was like, really? And at the time, again, fresh out of film school, I was sporting my film school look, which was long hair and a scraggly beard. And I was like, okay. And the weird thing was that it was a Friday morning, and I knew it was a Friday because the next day was Saturday, and I was about to direct my first music video. And I'll be honest, I was a little bit more interested in directing my first video than I was in auditioning to be the Rocketeer. But I was like, whatever. Stranger things have happened, so. Let's see. He said, so go back to your office and sit tight, and you'll get a phone call from my office with instructions. So everybody in my office and the development office in animation got a kick out of this story, and I was told I might have to cut my hair and shave my beard for this screen test. So I waited. I got a call from Jeffrey's office. All right, go back to the lot. Go to David Hoberman's office. David was the president of Touchstone, and get the script. So, and then they'll tell you what to do. So I went back over there. I go to David Hoberman's office. I step inside and I said, "Hey, I'm here. I'm Karey Kirkpatrick." And they're like, "Yeah." And I said, "I'm supposed to get a Rocketeer script." And it's like, "Okay, sit down over there." And I sat there for about 10, 15 minutes and, secretaries, assistants, answering phones, not paying much attention to me. And I thought, so I got up and I went to the desk and I said, "Hey, I got a call from Jeffrey's office to come here." And they're like, "Oh, you're him. Yes, here's the script and read this. And then you need to go to Nancy Foy's office." And Nancy Foy was the casting director. And then they'll give you the sides that you're supposed to do. So I go to Nancy Foy's office. I sit down. I come in. "Hey, I'm Karey Kirkpatrick," thinking that name's going to wield a lot of power by now. It does not. I get another blank stare. "Have a seat over there." And I sit down. It's like, all right, I've been through this. I got up. I go over. It's like, "Yeah, I'm the one that Jeffrey Oh, you're him. Oh, yes, here are your sides." It went on like that most of the morning, where I sort of felt like Jeffrey's idiot nephew. People like, okay. But then I remember at lunch, by the time I'd gone through these few meetings, they're like, "Yeah, we want you to go meet with the director." So there was this trailer across the lot, and I went, and Joe was having lunch. It was like, "Hey, I'm Joe Johnson." I was like, "Hey, I'm Karey." And I sat him down, and I said, bluntly, I said, "Is this just a monumental drag for you? Is this just a waste of your time?" I said, I'm sitting here. Are you looking at me and thinking Rocketeer? And he said, "Jeffrey saw something. I'm happily willing to see what he saw. He's been right before." And I said, "Okay." I said, "I'll be honest with you. I'm directing a music video tomorrow. Like, we can't get this done today. I really can't not direct a music video. Like, I got crews showing up." And he's like, "Oh, well, we'll see what we can do." I went back to my office to wait because there was supposedly I was going to do. So I go back, I sit around, I wait. There's radio silence for about 3 hours. Then my then literary agent at William Morris calls me. Her name's Beth Swafford. She's now a big agent at CAA. And she calls and says, "Well, this has been the weirdest day because I'm still going back and forth with Disney Business Affairs to make a 3-picture deal for you as an actor should you get the part." And, the way Disney operated, the basic, and I was like, "What?" And they said, "Yeah, well, the basic idea is if they cast you in the lead in the Rocketeer and you somehow become a star, they want to tie you up for your next 3 pictures and pre-negotiate the fees so that you can't, bilk them." And Disney still kind of operates this way with their Disney Channel stars, and they're like, "But we're having a hard time figuring out what the fee for your 3rd movie should be."
Hey, we've all been there, right?
Wow.
And I'm like, okay. Plus, it's further complicated by if I'm doing a screen test, they got to call in a whole crew. It becomes a union thing. It has to go through SAG. I have to be Taft-Hartley'd into SAG. You get $900 for doing a screen test. They got to get Jennifer Connelly. It's all this okay, so they're trying to figure this out. Now it's getting towards the end of the day. I'm really nervous about my music video shoot. I get a call, and it's like, all right, here's what they've decided. They're just going to do a video test, and if they do that, at the time that was covered by AFTRA, and they were separate. They didn't have to pay me or something. So I went from being all excited about I was going to get to read with Jennifer Connelly to I end up at 5:30, end of the day, in a cold room with a couple of chairs. It was like a scene from Tootsie. Nancy Foy was in the back row. I couldn't really see her. There was a table. I had like a pencil cup. And, these were my acting props, a pencil cup and something. And I read this scene. It's a scene where he discovers the jetpack.
Oh, right, with Peavy,
I seem to remember the line was, "It can make a man fly, Peeve," or something like that. She was like the nonplussed voice from the back of the room, and you get that, "Thank you." And I kind of got the feeling that it was like she was annoyed that she had to leap through the hoops that Jeffrey told her to leap through. And the ending.
Yeah.
I did not get the part.
Yeah, spoiler alert. But
it was people were so amused by the story that I can't remember if it was my idea or somebody suggested that I write it as a magazine article. So I contacted someone at Premiere Magazine, and I told them, like, yeah, that'd be great. So they commissioned me to write this article, and without sounding gauche, I'll tell you that they paid me $5,000 to write the article.
Really?
And I got to know the editor, and she was, Then right before it was supposed to go to print, they called and said, "I'm really sorry, but we don't have space for the article." Because I'd done a nice 2-page article, and they had sent out someone to do a photograph. And I was like, "Oh, you're kidding?" It's like, but I like you so much, and I feel bad. I called my editor friend at Entertainment Weekly, and they're going to run the story. They're going to do it. You have to make it a little shorter because they're only going to do 1 page. And I was like, oh, okay, I could cut some of the detail down. So I get a call from Entertainment Weekly. They're going to run it. They're going to pay me $2,500 because Premiere feels bad, and they just let me keep the money, right?
Wow.
So Entertainment Weekly, they ran the story, and it was called "I Could Have Been a Rocketeer." Then Empire Magazine from the UK sees it. They want to run the story. I get another $2,500. So my joke was, back then Disney was so notoriously cheap, is that I say I made $10,000 out of the experience, which is what they would have paid me to actually be the Rocketeer. So
right.
It all ended up well. And by the time the article ran, they had made the casting announcement, and they had put Billy Campbell's picture with the article, and my wife saw it, and she said, "Look who they cast. He looks like you."
Wow.
Now that is an insult to Billy Campbell in the biggest way. But his headshot and my headshot from when I was, at that time I was 24, 25, there is a similarity. So I like to think that I set them on the right track. Except Billy is, I think, around 6'3", right?
Yeah,
he's tall.
Yeah, he's a tall guy.
He's a tall guy.
And he's kind of ripped. At the time he was, and, much more rugged and looks much more like an action star than I ever did. That was my claim to fame, and then I got a nice little treat out of it, which was I sent Joe Johnston that very cool Art Deco Rocketeer poster. I sent it to Joe and said, "It'd be great if you could sign this. It would be a good memento."
Oh, wow.
And he signed the poster, "Dear Karey, better luck next time."
Oh, jeez.
So close. Wow.
That is fantastic.
Wow. Well,
that is
there you go.
Amazing.
That is something. And you were up against other competition too, from what we've been learning on looking at some of the screen tests. Not only were you involved, but John Corbett was a very close runner, and it was down to Billy or Corbett by the time they were getting into the casting, and which apparently went into the final days. So.
And let's not forget the toy poodle, Johnny Depp.
Johnny Depp actually turned it. Yeah.
That Billy talked about.
Yeah, he said that he actually went in and visited Johnny Depp about an hour after Johnny turned down the job, and he said he picked him up, and Johnny Depp is not very tall, so he said he picked him up like a toy poodle and just hugged him, and he was kind of surprised by the whole thing, but it seems like the right guy got the part because nobody else wanted the part.
And I bet Johnny didn't write an article called "I Could Have Been the Rocketeer."
Yeah.
To the best of our knowledge.
No regrets there.
No such article exists, and that's amazing that that you did so well with that article, and that's 25 years ago. That's no small amount of money today, but even but back then, even that much more. And I was an avid reader of Premiere at the time. I still get Entertainment Weekly. That's a big deal for them to give you the $5,000 and let you just keep it when they hadn't run it. That's nice to hear.
They were very. I wish I could remember the editor's name at the time, but she was remarkably gracious, and because going back and forth, she kind of served as the editor of the article and kind of got a kick out of it.
Right.
And what's cool is I told her, I said, I sent the article to Jeffrey, to make sure he wasn't blindsided by me and make sure he was okay.
Yeah.
And he wrote me back marked up in his trademark blue pen. Just a big "ha" with an exclamation mark. Love it. Run it.
That's great. Either that or get off the lot. That was a lot better. Yeah.
And what's crazy is, that was really the first time, Jeffrey, that we had an interaction like that. And I ended up working with him for 25 years. I mean, I've all of my firsts. Every first that I've had in the movie business has been with Jeffrey.
Wow.
So Rescuers Down Under was my first credit, right?
Yeah.
Movie credit. Then my first solo screenplay credit was Chicken Run, which that's where I got reintroduced to Jeffrey. I had done James and the Giant Peach, and the exec producer of that, Jake Eberts, had a deal with Aardman, and he had said to me, if you have any feature ideas, Aardman, wants to do a feature. And I had seen Wallace and Gromit, loved it. Yeah. It's like, oh my God, I would love to do an Aardman feature. And I said, let me think about that. And then I called the guy who worked for Jake, and I said, I think I have an idea. It's like, oh, they already got an idea that they're working on. I said, oh, what is it? He said, it's The Great Escape with chickens. I was like, oh God, that's a fantastic idea.
It just doesn't get any better than that.
And it's like they've hired this British writer, Jack Rosenthal, to write it. I was like, oh. And then Jack didn't quite get how the animation thing worked, and I got a call. This is when Aardman was still independent. And then I got that job, which was an amazing job. And then 6 months into the job, Aardman tells me, we're going to pitch it to DreamWorks and Jeffrey Katzenberg. And I said, oh, no, he's going to replace me. I just know it. But when we had the meeting, I was like, hey, you remember me, the Rocketeer? He was like, yeah. And then we met and had a great experience working on Chicken Run and flying home with him one time. He offered me a 3-picture deal at DreamWorks Animation and to come over there. So that was my, I ended up in 2000 or 1999 getting an office at DreamWorks. Oh. And I can tell you, and now Jeffrey's just left, but I just moved out of my office at DreamWorks. I have always had an office at DreamWorks Animation.
Wow, nearly 2 decades.
So I did a few movies for that. My first directing credit was Over the Hedge with Jeffrey. My first producing gig was this follow-up to Chicken Run, which was a thing we were working on called Tortoise versus Hare, the documentary. And I was producer on that. That was my first producing thing. My first live-action directing movie, which was, I did a movie with Eddie Murphy called Imagine That. Jeffrey called Eddie to vouch for me and say, if you don't hire him, you're crazy. Oh. And to this day, we're still friends, still have breakfast, and never, ever would have thought that, when he was telling me to go be the Rocketeer.
When you were sitting in his office singing to him at 7 a.m, which is a wonderful thing to picture.
Not a fun time to sing.
Yeah, absolutely not. Karey, when saw that you had done Chicken Run, I dearly loved that film. I realize I haven't watched it in too long, so that'll be in the rotation again. So my big fanboy moments jumping out of your very impressive resume were you working with Aardman, and then adapting works by two of my all-time favorite authors. You did the screenplay for Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and then, of course, James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl. So Douglas Adams and Roald Dahl.
I know, they hate me in England. Because I also did Thunderbirds.
Really? You worked on the...
Well, I did the first 4 drafts.
On the Jonathan Frakes...
no, before they decided to make them kids.
Really?
Yeah, and I'll tell you what's weird is
I'm a huge Jerry Anderson fan over here.
Yeah, well, so I watched every single Thunderbirds episode, and Peter Hewitt was attached to direct it, and I was writing it for Pete, and Pete very much wanted to keep that, that's quite a statement, that sort of wooden,
which, I know someone who can pull strings.
Which later, Team America did so well with all that, Gary, come over here, Gary. So I wrote in that sort of campy
the cadence,
style, and foolishly didn't realize that when you write that and you read the screenplay, it reads like a really bad screenplay. It reads like I write really terrible dialogue. The guys, Tim and Eric at Working Title, just never quite got it. they came to me one time. This is one of those typical Hollywood stories, but it was like, hey, could Will Smith be the youngest Tracy brother? It's like,
What?
no, because
Wow,
they
I
had
can't picture that one.
they had just seen Men in Black.
Wow.
And it's like, yeah, okay,
Wow.
there's an original thought.
Yeah.
But yeah, so between Thunderbirds, which was great because I was living in London while I was writing it, and every time I'd get in a taxi, they'd pick me up over on Dean Street and right in Soho, and it's like, yeah, they're very chatty, and I'd get a Cockney taxi driver. It's like, what you working on in there, mate? You know, it's like, oh, I'm doing Thunderbirds. Yes, milady.
Oh,
they would start doing. They would start doing Parker.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, every driver is Parker automatically. Oh, that's great.
yeah, and James was a really great experience because I was living in San Francisco while we were doing that at Skellington with Henry, and became really good friends with Lissy Dahl and the Dahl family, and ended up going to Great Missenden, and Lissy invited me and my wife, and we stayed in the house in the guest annex. And in the morning, Lissy woke me up and she's like, "You want to go out to the shed?" I was like, "Yes." And so everybody probably knows about the little shed that Roald Dahl rode in. It's now at the Roald Dahl Museum in Great Missenden, but back then it was still at the house where he lived. And
Oh my gosh.
we go out there, and Lissy takes me out, and she's like, "Well, here's the little chair," and she walked me through, like, he would walk down this path and get a yellow legal pad and sharpen his pencils and sit right here and write from 10 till 1, and then come in and have a sandwich, and then go back out and write from 2 to 4, and then he'd go into town, and she goes, "And here's the key, and there's the filing cabinet, and help yourself, look around."
Wow.
Oh, are you kidding me?
Gave me the key, and I opened the filing cabinet, and there's yellow legal pad after yellow legal pad, and I pulled it out, and it says James and the Giant Cherry Tree, which is how it started, and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and all the original. And I just sat there for hours just flipping through, all written in pencil, all these things, my entire childhood, just like right there in this kind of transcendent moment in this room that is just covered in nicotine stains and smoke stains and, tons of crap all over it. Like his hip bone that he had removed and replaced was sitting there. And his dog, Chopper, who shows up in the Quentin Blake drawings, and Quentin Blake originals laying around. It's like
It is just mind blowing.
That was fantastic, and got to know her. And they asked me to write another Roald Dahl thing for the BBC, which was the Giraffe, the Pelly and Me, which is one of his sort of lesser known stories.
Really?
And then Hitchhikers was a slightly a strange experience, how I came onto it, because I get a call from Jay Roach, who was attached to direct, and it's like, Jay wants to meet with you about Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And I was like, oh, okay. I'm embarrassed to say, I had never read the books. I didn't know.
Oh, really?
Hitchhikers. Somehow that had, and it's weird because growing up a huge Python fan, I kind of knew the title, but those books missed me somehow. So I got sent a screenplay. So I'm reading a screenplay knowing nothing. I know nothing of Deep Thought. I know nothing of 42. I know nothing of any of it. And I read it, and I'm like, well, this is really funny. And the script was written by Douglas. I'm like, oh, this is like Python, and and when I get to the meaning, everything, all of it was just like, I loved it. But I was able to look at it with some fresh eyes as a screenwriter and structure, and see why it wasn't greenlit, and why studios were having a hard time getting behind it, knowing what it was. But my first thought on that was, I don't think I can write words that will seamlessly mingle with this guy's words. He's working on a level that I don't quite feel like I work. So, but I wanted to meet Jay. We had gone to film school, just missed each other, and he was a TA there when I was a student. And, I went to his house on a Saturday to go meet him. As a sidebar story, the door opens and his wife answered, and she was like, "Come in, Jay's not quite, he's on the phone." And I sit down and with her, and I say, we start talking about our kids, schools, and kindergarten, and all that kind of stuff that we're talking about. And then Jay comes out, and he's like, hey, sorry to keep you waiting. And we go into this office. And into the office we go, there's all these guitars on the wall and like a drum set. And I'm looking around, and I said, do you play guitar? Because I'm a guitarist. I said, do you play guitar? He's like, no, my wife does that you just met. You know, she's in the Bangles. I was like,
oh my God, that's right. He was married to Susanna Hoffs, wasn't he?
He still is. I was like, oh, is that who that is? I had no idea.
Oh, jeez.
And I was like, oh, she's so lovely and wonderful. And we're all still friends to this day because our kids all ended up at the same school.
Okay, so can you tell Susanna Hoffs I said hi?
I shall.
Will you just throw that out there, just so I know that she heard?
I was just wondering if he gave you the look that his wife does with that sideways glance and walk like an Egyptian when you said, "Who?" No, that's.
I don't recall that if he gave me that look, but I probably had my own eye roll.
Yeah.
Like I'm such an idiot that I didn't realize that's, Susanna Hoffs, who I had a complete crush on, all through high school. So, and Suzanne and I ended up playing in this sort of parent band at our school together, and became, really good friends, and still are. So Jay sat me down and said, "So here's the script," and I said, "Yeah, I love it. I don't know the books." He's like, "Oh, that's so good. I'm so glad you don't know the books." And I said, "I don't know if I can do this." He's like, "No. I'm sure you can, because I've seen Chicken Run, and I think your sensibility is right. That the way that movie's structured but still maintains a British sensibility is exactly what I think we need here." I was like, "Okay, well, if you think so, So I got the job, and I developed it with Jay, and then Jay decided he was not going to direct it. So then they were calling new directors, and I met with, I won't say their names because I don't want to sell them out, but I met with like 3 pretty well-respected directors, and I would like meet them at a bar to go talk, and they would all say, I don't know what your language rating is on this show, but I would sit down with them, and okay. But they would go, yeah, this is fun. I don't want to be the guy who f***ed up Hitchhikers. And I'm sitting there, and it's like, wait a minute, am I going to be the guy who f***ed up Hitchhikers? Because I was sort of ignorant to the rabid fan base. But one day I get on the phone. They had called these director-producer team in London called Hammer and Tongs, and it was Garth Jennings and Nick Goldsmith. They get on the phone, and they're like, well, they told us, they wanted us to meet on this movie, but we said, we don't want to do that until we've had a chance to talk to the writer. And I said, you've never worked in Hollywood, have you? Don't you know screenwriters are the fly on the ass of this business? But not in England, where, writers are a little bit more respected. And they had some questions for me and things, and they ended up being really great. We had a great time, and they came up. Really, it was Garth and Nick and their team that came up with the pitch that sealed the deal for Nina at Disney to greenlight it, because it was their visual pitch. But what was cool about that process is that there was a guy named Robbie Stamp who had worked with Douglas, who was kind of the point person between the family, the estate, and us. And he gave me Douglas's hard drive, which had. And Douglas had been writing the script on and off for 20 years. So I had all of Douglas's material to kind of sift through and see what I could use. And my goal on Hitchhikers, and I have maintained this, is that I would not tell anyone what I added of my own invention and what I took from Douglas's drives, because I didn't want to set myself up for comparison. And honestly, my goal on that was to be as invisible as I could be, to honor what he had created, and really not make it about me. I mean, I really tried to be just in service of the material, and I didn't escape brutal criticism from fans who just hated the movie, and with a kind of a little bit of a lack of understanding. I mean, honestly, Disney was really not the right studio for that material. If you're going to do a movie that really should be more like Buckaroo Banzai or Holy Grail or something like that, you don't do it through Disney.
Right. Although I have to say, I think the film is underrated. And, I got into Hitchhikers from the books and then the radio dramas and then the BBC TV series. So I, really grew up around it from early teenage years. And, like I said, I'll just say it's underrated. And you deserve
I appreciate
better.
it. Well, I will say that because there's a couple of things that, without getting too into detail, and there's a couple of casting decisions that were not how the character was written, that I feel like I didn't really have time to either make the adjustments or to, sometimes they make mistakes in movies where you're writing for a certain someone in mind or a certain type, and then they cast a different way. And what you do as a writer usually is you try to write to those person's strengths so that it's not like this happened to me on Chicken Run when I first wrote the part of Rocky, because we were trying to write a con man. I had Burt Lancaster from The Rainmaker in mind.
Okay.
So I was writing all this in that kind of cadence of, I'm going to make it rain. It's going to come down from, that kind of. And I had written it that way, and I get to the first recording session with Mel Gibson, and I was like, he sounds terrible. He's not doing it right at all. But I realized I was asking Mel Gibson to do Burt Lancaster. It's like, how about I write it for Mel Gibson and what Mel Gibson's strengths are, and totally change the character. And it's like, and then it's like he was great. And Hitchhikers, I didn't quite have enough. I don't feel like I was able to do that. And the script reads, I disagreed with Garth just about casting kids as the two guys looking for the answer. And there were just some other British talent that I think could have nailed some of those jokes a little better, the Hugh Laurie's of the world. And because when you have someone like Bill Nighy as Slarty Bardfast, who's awesome, and why am I blanking on the great actor who did the voice of the book?
Oh, Stephen Fry.
Stephen Fry.
So yeah, you have Fry and Laurie.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Fry and Laurie. He was awesome, and Alan Rickman was as Marvin was great, and Sam Rockwell, and there are certain things that I do think the script held up pretty well. Like I said, I never divulge what bit was mine because there were some entries to the book that had to be written, and that was very daunting.
I can imagine.
Yeah, that was like, man, I don't know if I can pull this off. So I really enjoyed working on it, going over to England and rehearsing with those guys, because I had just finished watching The British Office, and so I was in awe of Martin Freeman, as I still am.
Oh, absolutely.
So
and Zooey Deschanel, of course.
Well, and Zoe and I had done a movie. We did 2 movies together because she did this little indie film that I wrote called Flakes. She's great, and I had done then later I did Spiderwick Chronicles with and Caleb, her dad, was the DP on it. So all in the Deschanel family.
Yeah. I want to take you back to the Rocketeer era when you were back at Disney. That was roughly the time that the documentary Waking Sleeping Beauty was focused on, the conversion of the slumbering Disney into the animation powerhouse that it became in the 80s and 90s, and being part of the Rescuers series and stuff like that. And watching that, you were there for that change at the very beginning. Do you think that Rocketeer didn't fit in with that whole concept of where they were trying to take the studio at the time, where Katzenberg was going with that, or?
I don't know. I do remember. I mean, at that time, I was so focused in the animation world because I had the good fortune of writing the animated movie that was sandwiched between Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, which were kind of starting this new animation, revolution, sort of the rebirth of it. And unfortunately, Rescuers didn't quite perform the way those others did. Rescuers was originally a musical. I mean, it had a couple of songs in it, and my partner and I had written a couple of songs. They decided not to make it a musical. And so I think we got a little bit lost in once Jeffrey had Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Lion King. Once he hit that groove with Howard Ashman and Alan Menken and those musicals, and they kind of figured out what that end of the studio was about. And at that time, the Disney philosophy, Jeffrey's philosophy, was regarding movie stars, and they were so frugal that you remember that was like, get them on the way up or get them on the way down, right? They were doing things, and forever. I mean, Jeffrey's all-time favorite movie that he made while at Disney and kept trying to remake. I remember being at DreamWorks Animation, and you're always looking for live action paradigms, and he's like Down and Out in Beverly Hills. Not Down and Out in Beverly Hills. Yeah. Is that the one with Nick Nolte?
Yeah, Nick Nolte. Yeah. Bodou Sovidizo. Yeah.
Exactly. He's just like, that was just the perfect movie for him, All of those movies like that, Pretty Woman was being made when I was there, and What About Bob, I think they were doing there, and, those kinds of movies is where they were really thriving. And I don't think they quite had hit that action movie sweet spot. Can you? Yeah, I don't know. Can you think of others that they did then?
One of the things that I can never figure out is why they released The Rocketeer as a Walt Disney picture instead of a Touchstone picture, because it doesn't seem like. I think what they were trying to do is going for merchandising and stuff, and all the merchandising that was coming out of it was aimed for kids. It was going to be like, I think, Burger King or something like that, and all the stuff they were expecting this was going to be a kids movie, but it was. I mean, if you look at the poster artwork and stuff like that, all that iconic Art Deco, that's not going to appeal to a kid. And it just seemed it seemed like it was misplaced in their in their portfolio. It seemed like it would have been a perfect Touchstone film. I don't know if that's what destroyed it, or we're not. We talk about
it might be. I bet you they were. You would lean on that Walt Disney logo and that brand to do a lot of the marketing work for you in terms of saying to an audience what's safe to come to. So I guess they were hoping that it would bring in. It feels like you're right that market was probably too young for Rocketeers, and it wasn't necessarily bringing in teenage boys, 12 to 18 or so. And yeah, it might have been a slightly different perception.
Was there much buzz about the movie during production? Did you hear much when you're on the campus of Disney, or is it just another production going on?
No, I think they had super high hopes for it to be a franchise.
Yeah, it was going to be like the next Indiana Jones or something, and they'd be able to tag it with other stuff and channel. They could have done like animated series with it and stuff like that, but it just never. What happened? I think the biggest thing that it was clobbered by 2 weeks before Robin Hood Prince of Thieves came out, and then the week after it showed up, Terminator 2 hit the screens. So with the summer dollars all went to those other two movies, and then City Slickers followed the following week after Terminator 2. So Rocketeer got lost because it didn't have a target audience, and it didn't have a lot of word of mouth that wasn't swallowed up by Terminator. So just, I don't know what they could have done to resolve it, other than maybe putting it out at a different time of year, or maybe putting it or marketing it differently, because it just didn't. It wasn't a kids movie, but it was more like an Indiana Jones movie, but they never sold it like that, or they tried to, but it was too late. It had already been released, and it's hard to reheat the mashed potatoes.
Yeah,
and we didn't see that the more traditional poster. I mean, I will always just love the Art Deco one, but I know what it means, and I know what it means to me. But the more traditional hero poster with the photos of the cast and Billy Campbell up top,
explosions and stuff,
quite heroic. Yeah, exactly, and aircraft flying and everything else. That tells you at least what the movie is about.
And I can tell you, just being on, there's so many arguments that happen over movie posters. It's just arguments that you hardly that the filmmakers rarely win.
I know this is a big, wide open question, and we do appreciate you being on for so long. But what would you say is the biggest change in the way movies were made back then versus the way that movies are made now? Is it harder? Is it easier? Are there where do you see a production starting as being a lot more difficult? Or
I think it's a lot harder today, personally, just to because there's so many screens, Yeah.
You're trying to fill it. You're trying to fill in a lot of. You've got a lot of software to eat.
Yeah, and when I see different screens.
Yeah, like Netflixes and the Hulus of the world, and trying to find the audience that will pay for it, or.
Yeah, it's just so many. It's hard these days because everybody's looking for tent poles. It's kind of hard to, for original content, like all of that ends up being on Netflix or HBO or. So to do a feature like that in this Marvel world, where everything is either a superhero movie or, needs to be something big like that. Like even animated movies today, because there's so many of them, it's hard. Those used to be special, and It's every weekend is so crowded. Everything hinges on your opening weekend. It's gotten a lot more difficult.
Yeah, so there's a lot more chances if it's not a total success, you'll never see it again. But that's what happened to the Rocketeer. So I guess that part hasn't changed over 30 years.
Yeah, these days it's all about if it doesn't have a massive record-setting opening weekend, it's gone right away.
It's really hard.
Do you think that live action has a bigger chance over animated, or does it matter anymore? Do you think that having an animated film versus a live action that the audience changes significantly?
Yeah, but those lines are getting so blurred now. Is Guardians of the Galaxy live action or animated? I mean, it's like, I'm pretty old school. I think a good story, well told, finds an audience. And just the question is getting people to theaters where screens get bigger.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And in your home theater, and the viewing experience in your house is pretty good. You can get great audio and pretty big screens, and it just gets harder to make it an event that people want to go see. When shows like Breaking Bad and Veep and like everything been Game of Thrones and everything that's coming out a television medium is so epic and so great. Like, I think some of the best writing is now on TV. It gets hard, and it's hard for studios, to figure out what to make.
Yeah, I would imagine that instead of making an hour and a half movie, that you now have to think about 14 hours to do a season of Game of Thrones, which has to be all shot at once so that you can do all the production right. The taxing on the screenwriter must be immense.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's there's this recurring theme here that show business is absolutely a crazy business. It seems like it's always changing, it's always evolving, and it's interesting listening to this, participating in this, and then thinking about the particular minute. It was minute 37 that we're in here on this episode, and you've got Timothy Dalton, who most of this minute is him running to try to sort of unfire Jenny Blake. And, we see him putting the flats back up, and he's shoving the extras out of the way. He almost runs over a minstrel at one point. And again, who among us has not done that? But there's right at second 40. I have to call this out. He's angry, he's stressed, he's frustrated, he's running along. But then second 40, he flips the switch, hits the Timothy Dalton grin, and he actually primps his wig a couple of times to make sure that he looks good before he gets Jenny Blake's attention. Of course, she turns around and she's in tears at the end. But just that ridiculous little thing that he does that's so believable. I can so imagine, an actor in his position stopping to tidy the wig and turn on the smile.
Well, I think one of the reasons that Karey, that we had you on for this minute was the craziness, shown in the Rocketeer. It just never stops. That you're at the whims of, the top flight actors and the directors having to deal with sudden casting changes during a production and pressures from inside and outside of the production. I guess that's never going to change, no matter what the technology, no matter what the format, no matter what the audience. So I guess that's
no. I'm dealing with it now. I'm directing the movie at Warner Brothers, and am on the other end as the director, being thrown casting decisions that are being driven by the marketing department. Being told, it sure would be great if this person, because they're easy to book on talk shows.
And let's get Will Smith as a Tracy brother.
Exactly.
Is that the worst note you've ever? What is the worst note you've ever received on a production?
The worst note I ever received was when I was writing Smurfs 2, and I got a note from the studio that Grouchy Smurf was a little one note.
Wow.
And I'm like,
no disrespect intended, but isn't every single Smurf by definition one note?
Well, it's like, what do you want me? You need me to bring some subtle nuance to Grouchy's character?
Yeah. Have you ever seen Snow White? Have you ever noticed?
Yes,
exactly.
Oh my goodness.
Sneezy, guess what he does all the time?
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
You want Sleepy to wake up a little?
Yeah.
That was
wow.
Probably my worst studio note. I did get a note while I was at Disney. I had turned in something, and the studio executive there, Charlie Fink, I got the page back, and it went, and there was a note written on it, and it said 2/3 more funny. And I looked at this note, and I was like, wow, that is just a weird fraction to ask for how much funnier it should be.
Oh.
And it was, he was like, no, I meant the second third the second third of the movie should be funnier, or something like that.
Oh, jeez.
Wow.
I was like, oh, okay.
2/3
But
more
I was
funny.
like, for the longest time, that became something that me and my fellow writers would be like, that needs to be 2/3 more funny.
I had just
As
I had just read a biography of the later years of Groucho Marx's life, and he had talked about doing the movie The Coconuts, and Irving Berlin was a composer for some of the songs in it, and one of the songs that he had written, he'd not written it for the purpose of it, but he tried to sell it in The Coconuts, was Always, the famous Berlin song Always, and the studio cut it. They said, and the reason for cutting it was they said not funny, and Berlin found that hysterical, and he used to write Christmas card notes to Groucho, and always end it with the same note. He'd say, no matter how I think of it, adding Always would never have made Coconuts any funnier. Love Irving Berlin.
yes,
that's great.
That's famous. There's a great memo going around, that you've seen where in MGM days on the notes from watching Wizard of Oz, and the studio note saying, cut the rainbow song.
Oh, my God.
It's like, yeah, cut that annoying rainbow song. Perfect song ever written.
Yeah, nobody's ever going to remember that one.
Yeah. Exactly.
We've talked with several people about the issues that Joe Johnston had with the higher ups at Disney, and it got very acrimonious. But one of the things that they wanted to do was get rid of that silly helmet.
Yeah, they wanted to do more of a space helmet so you could see his face. And, oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, this happens a lot. Again, it's the Tracy brother.
Yeah.
Yes, and you know why Grouchy Smurf is grouchy.
Yeah, I do.
Suddenly I want to see that Will Smith Thunderbirds movie, though. I'm strangely compelled. But
weirdly fascinating.
And then we
had
gone, Pete and I had gone to see a movie. It was called Courage Under Fire. And we came back and we said, we found the perfect, why am I blanking on the youngest Tracy brother? Jeff is the dad. It was Alan. We found the perfect Alan, this new kid, he's great in this movie, Matt Damon. And they're like, no, he's not going to be. And they were like, he's not going to be anything. I was like, jeez. Okay.
Who was you? Yeah. Could you give us the original casting? I mean, was Paxton involved in it? Were any of the ones in the?
Oh no, it was me and Pete were long gone. No. Jeff Bridges was who Pete wanted to play Jeff Tracy.
Okay. Did you have a brains?
We did not have a brains. I think Parker. We wanted Pete Postlethwaite.
Okay.
And I think Kristen Scott Thomas was going to be Lady Penelope.
Oh wow, yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, that could work.
I would want to see that movie.
Was there anything left of your writing and what we saw on screen?
No, not at all. I found that movie unrecognizable.
Yeah.
Then I don't mind saying that is not a film that I consider underrated. I do, Hitchhiker's trying to be polite here.
I just thought it was a conceptual misfire. And I'll tell you what happened is the studios didn't know what they had, and Spy Kids came out, and they were like, yeah, let's do that. I was like, well, you're missing the point.
Oh, dear. Wow.
But I told Pete halfway through, I said, I think you should make it with puppets and just do it kind of cheesy. Right. And he was so into how cool the ships we had designed looked, and he was like, what? That's crazy. And then Team America came out, and I was like, see, I wasn't so crazy. That's funny.
Told you so.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been a puppet Austin Powers. I mean, that's how it could have worked. But oh well.
Exactly.
Wow. Well, Karey, thanks so much for talking a little bit about the Rocketeer and a lot about your career. We appreciate it very much.
This has been fascinating.
My pleasure.
It's a thrill.
Yeah.
And we're recording this on a Friday, so enjoy your weekend. But for folks who want to talk some more about this, please join us on our social media. We've got a bunch of places you can do it. Of course, always on Twitter at Rocketeer Minute. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Rocketeer Minute. And, of course, the big site, rocketeerminute.com, where this episode and a bunch of other episodes are also out there. Find us on iTunes and Google Play. Sign up just by typing in Rocketeer Minute and hitting the subscribe button, and you can get a lot of this great content delivered hot and fresh every day, Monday through Friday. Join us here tomorrow when we talk a little bit more about the Laughing Bandit and where he's going to go with Jenny. So we'll see you tomorrow here on the Rocketeer Minute. Until next time, over and out.